Good morning, Nichols. What, you can't hear me? Is this better? Well, I don't want to get that close to it. Is that any better? Can you all hear me? Okay. Well, we haven't talked about worldview issues in quite some time. And so the news has continued to cycle, and things have continued to move forward in various ways or move backwards, depending on your perspective. So there is quite a bit to talk about today. And before we do that, I've been thinking about the church and various things that I would like to present to the church, and when would be the best opportunity to do this. And the elders have been continuing to discuss. One thing we've never restarted is small groups, and I think we're probably headed in that direction. And so we don't know exactly how that'll look at this point, but I'm thinking about maybe taking this Sunday school hour and doing some things other than just worldview moving forward. So for instance, as an example, I have a excellent 10-week video-based series on the history of the Protestant Reformation that I would really love to use in some capacity. And I'm thinking maybe this is the best time to do that. So if I do go in that direction, because those videos are 23 minutes each, and so it wouldn't require the entire time. And so perhaps take 10 minutes every Sunday to just talk through issues of the news, and then play that video. But I'm also interested in feedback. I have an interest in church history, I have an interest in theology, and this is an opportunity, I think, to present a lot of those things. Those are things I think that are important. I realize that not everybody would necessarily agree with me on that. And so in other words, I fully recognize that there are people who are wrong when it comes to some of those issues, okay? Now, I say that with deep sincerity. I'm expecting a little bit of a chuckle, which you obliged me in that, which I appreciate. But I do think there are things of great importance that not everybody sees them as being of great importance. And so, I recognize that's a reality. It just is. But give me some feedback, maybe not right now, but if you have some feedback on what what your thinking would be, that's kind of where I'm going with this. There are other things of worldview. I have other notes, other lessons that I've actually written and prepared, and so this transition would take place, sometime in the new year, and it wouldn't be a total rejection of what we've been doing. There'd still be, some worldview issues that I would report on, and some of it would be just go by what's happening, right? If there's something big happening, we might take the whole hour and just talk through that issue. But it would be more like maybe a third worldview and 2/3 something else. Okay? Is that sort of clear? Okay. For today, because we haven't met for quite some time, there's just a variety of issues that we can talk about. I have 3 or 4. And I know that some of you really do follow the news quite closely, and so maybe nothing that I'll say here today is unknown to you or new to you. The first one of these, I'm assuming, is certainly not new, and it's something we've actually mentioned before, but that's the situation that was before the Supreme Court here just a couple of weeks ago. And I don't have a lot to say about it, just to mention it again, but that's Dodds versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. And so this is the case out of Mississippi that has to do with abortion. and banning abortions after 15 weeks. And it's gone before the Supreme Court. Did any of you listen to any of that or pay attention to any of that? I did not listen to the oral arguments. I didn't have time to do that. So I've just listened to some summaries of them. But the summaries that I've heard is it sounds like to me that if Mississippi wins this case, it'll probably be a 5-4 decision on the part of the Supreme Court, and it seems like there's 3 ways this could go. If the liberals actually were to win, and that would probably mean that Roberts, the Chief Justice, sided with them, then things would basically stay as they have been since 1973. Roe v. Wade would still be the law of the land. So that's one scenario. A second scenario would be that the 73 Roe v. Wade decision will be overturned. And it seems like there's a real possibility of that happening. And it probably would be a 5-4 decision. The third option would be that they'll make some kind of a compromise and the Mississippi law will be allowed to stand, and abortion would be restricted in certain ways. Probably, after 15 weeks, there'd be no abortion in the United States, but it'd be some kind of a compromise. And so that seems to be where that situation is at. But the positive news in this, from where I stand, is that this is, there is a real possibility, it seems, that Roe v. Wade could be overturned. And that's pretty extraordinary if you think about it. Now, what would that mean if Roe v. Wade is overturned? What would that mean for abortion in the United States? It would go back to the states, and I think the conservative justices one of their arguments is that that's where it belongs, that the U.S. Constitution doesn't address this issue. And so abortion rights has been invented. It's not a constitutional right, it's an invented right. And what has happened is, therefore, the citizens and as voters have been deprived of their opportunity to have a voice and to weigh in as to whether or not abortion should be legal or not legal, because the Supreme Court has usurped that role of the authority of the citizen. And so this would go back to the states. So what would that mean in Oregon? In Oregon, it would be initially there'd be no change, right? And so what you would have is that you'd have probably half the states would ban abortion, the other half would be pro-abortion, and you'd have some states that would be pro-abortion would have more severe restrictions than others. So it'd be more of a hodgepodge across the country. But from my perspective, of course, it would be a step in the right direction. What, of course, is also interesting in this is the response of, people have talked about this will create a civil war. I think they're using that in a metaphorical sense. I don't think they're really suggesting that people are going to start, shooting each other with guns and bombs like what happened in the American Civil War. But you're talking about a situation, if Roe is overturned, it will be very interesting and somewhat scary, actually, to see the fallout of that in terms of the politics of the whole situation.
One of the options that could be very real, though, if they really jam it through, is for Congress to create the right to abortion. And right now, I can't think of any Democrats who would not vote for that.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be legal throughout the whole country.
Yes, but they'd also have to have the votes to accomplish that.
Well, and that's what I think they would at this point. Not if they could jam it through
Mm-hmm.
Next January.
But in the Senate, they would have a filibuster, I would assume. In the Senate, I would assume they would have a filibuster. They'd have to have 60 votes. It is interesting, but what Marilyn brings up is interesting. Why has abortion never been made the law of the land through Congress? What's the answer to that? It would never pass. Yeah. Now, would it pass now? Personally, I mean, unless they could do some jerry-rigging to get it through, I think the filibuster would stop it from passing. But the answer that it's never been passed into law through Congress the way these things actually should take place is because they've never had the votes to pass it. And so they have usurped the will of voters by allowing the Supreme Court to just make the decision. One other thought before we leave this is that, and you might be aware of this, I hope you are. If you're not, you need to be aware of this. The United States has the most liberal abortion laws. What's the answer to that? On the planet. That is the answer. Europe, Western Europe, which is generally considered more secular than the United States, almost all the nations, maybe all the nations of Western Europe and Eastern Europe are far more restrictive when it comes to abortion. There's only a handful of countries that are in the same place as the United States when it comes to abortion. Want to give some names? China and North Korea. Okay? And there's a handful of others as well. But the reality is that when it comes to this issue, the people that we're sort of in bed with on this issue are some of the worst governments and worst dictatorships on the entire planet. So I think people need to recognize that the United States is not only pro-abortion, it is rabidly pro-abortion. It is pro-abortion in a way that almost no other country is. And I think a lot of countries would look at us and say, we're really bloodthirsty and barbaric on this issue. Because those other countries are saying, we're not going to go there. And so anyway, it's a very interesting thing. It's a very important thing. I think it's the preeminent moral issue of our day. And it'll be very interesting to see. The Supreme Court usually, their term will end, it's early summer, I think. The decisions come out in June, is it? They usually have when their term ends and they start to announce a lot of decisions. They could announce it any time, but it probably would be more in spring or early summer. I've seen two hands have gone up. Lloyd's went up and Dan's went up, so we'll take them in order. Lloyd. Yeah, and it's so interesting what happened in Virginia. I mean, I'm sitting here listening to this, and my response is that a bunch of parents, and particularly a bunch of moms, got really deeply offended by what was going on in their schools. And so they became militarized and energized to make a difference. So are you saying how do we reproduce that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's also interesting too. I think this is correct. The general sense of what I'm going to say is correct. The details might not be entirely true. What I'm thinking though is that one of the most liberal voting blocks in the United States, if not the most liberal, okay, that's where I'm hedging. Is it the most liberal or one of the most liberal? Do you know what it is? It's young, single female. Young, single female votes Democrat by and large and is very liberal. And you know how you make them more conservative? You get them married and they become moms. And all of a sudden their shift changes and they start to ask different questions. They start to ask questions like, what is best for my kids? And all of a sudden they start to move in a more conservative direction. And so that means that things like marriage really matters for a variety of reasons, right? This is just one reason, but it really matters. And marriage is in massive decline in our culture, where people simply aren't getting married, and that's a tragedy on so many levels, because every statistic demonstrates that what is best for kids is a mom and a dad in a marriage relationship with a biological connection to their children. Okay, that's the optimal situation for children. Not that there can't be other good situations like a mom and a dad in a committed relationship with adopted children, right? But the more you get away from that optimal situation, the more children are going to pay the price. So the demise of marriage in our country is hurtful on many, many levels, but it does play into politics. Again, like, how do you make a responsible man? Who are the men committing the crimes in our culture? It's young, single males. How do you start to solve some of that? Well, you get them married and they have kids and they have a responsibility. So, anyway, Dan.
Well, I was just going to say I heard an excerpt of the opening statement for some of those oral arguments led by the guy from Mississippi. But it's worth listening to, actually, because he highlighted some of the things he talked about, how the Supreme Court has kind of taken on a role that is not really meant to take on,
Mm-hmm.
and they're interpreting things out of the Constitution that aren't there. But it's worth listening to.
Yeah, and the fact that abortion just never goes away, it can't go away. And it is because the Supreme Court has taken a role that it shouldn't be in. Yeah.
I think it's helpful because I know I do. You get kind of, it's not really clear in your mind how issues like this fit into particular, roles of government, and he's kind of articulated it well, and it helps you kind of in your own mind kind of figure out, well, where do issues like this fit in particular branches of government, you know what I mean? Anyway, it was helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It's where if you can find it, it's worth listening.
All right, so that is one big issue that's developed here over the last month, or at least there's been forward progress. Mm-hmm.
Al Mohler the other morning, he talked about how the FDA has now, I think,
Yes.
I don't know if I'm saying this right, has permanently approved the abortion pill.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Made it last, and you don't even have to see a doctor.
yeah, and so, in terms of, the court battles, it's like, you've got these court battles that you're going, oh, this is a victory, and then you've got the FDA.
Yeah.
It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like they're going behind your back and going,
Yeah.
like,
So the morning after pill, some of these things are being made so accessible, it's almost like you can just, I guess, buy it off the shelf, maybe, is the direction they're going. And I don't know a lot about that pill, that medication, but I do know I read Abby Johnson's story And Abby Johnson is the young woman who ran a Planned Parenthood clinic and was very pro-abortion, came from a Christian family, and defended her role for many, many years. Finally was asked to assist in an abortion. No one else was available in the clinic, and so they asked her to come in. And she was, I think, she was deeply impacted by what she saw. And I think she was deeply offended by what she saw, the way in which the doctor was making light of what was happening. And she realized that this was a preborn human being that was being put to death. But in her book, she herself, I think, had 2 abortions, and at least one of them was by the pill, maybe both. But she describes how hard that was on her physically. And so, people that, again, I'm not a... Yeah. And so I'm not a medical person, so I don't know. Maybe her situation isn't everybody's situation. But the idea that you just take this pill and it's just all done with, it isn't. You think about ending, a woman who's has a life within her and this pill kills that life. That's a traumatic thing. And it, for her, it made her very ill. There was a lot of blood loss. And so you start just dispensing that out like candy. How many people are going to, how many young women are going to be hurt by that? And maybe some will even die, if there's not done properly. So if you just think about a medical procedure, you're terminating a life within you. That's no small thing from a medical perspective. So you're right, they're just taking off all the safeguards and just saying, have at it. So, all right, well, the second issue I'll mention, I'm sure this one, I'm assuming that many of you are aware of this. This has been in the news. It's really interesting, and it's sad. It's kind of, in my mind, it's just abhorrent. It's something we've talked a lot about, and that is the swimmer from Penn State, or from the University of Pennsylvania. Are you familiar with this case? So this is... the name that the person is going under is Leah Thomas. And I'll just read some of this to you. Well, University of Pennsylvania, now stop for just a moment. The University of Pennsylvania, what conference are they in? No, they're the Ivy League Conference. So Harvard, Yale. What's the other really elite school? There's Harvard, Yale, Princeton. Yeah, Boston College, I think. Anyway, there's a series of schools, and some are better known than others, but these are all, if you're in the Ivy League, that means that you are among the most elite of all universities in the United States. There's only a handful that actually even compete. The Stanfords, Cornell, Notre Dame, schools like that. That there's a handful of schools that would be considered kind of Ivy League, even though they're not in that Ivy League conference. But so this is not a podunk school. This is one of the best universities in the country. So the University of Pennsylvania transgender swimmer Leah Thomas, who spent 3 years at the Ivy League school swimming as a male. And not only swimming as a male, but was an all-conference swimmer. Okay? So do you understand this? We're talking about a male swimmer at a Division I school, at an Ivy League school, which of course means from a sports perspective, the Ivy League is the elite academically. From an athletic perspective, the University of Alabama is the Ivy League school, right, for football. But still, it is a Division I program. This person, this male, swam as a freshman, sophomore, junior for the University of Pennsylvania men's swim team, where he was second team all conference. So he's a very successful male swimmer. He decided to come out as transgender and start swimming with the women. Okay? It says here he has been busy smashing female pool records. And while he's been doing this, and I'm using the pronoun he. And why am I using the pronoun he? Because he is male. Yeah, he's XY, and the only thing that he's had done to him is the suppression of testosterone. He's not had any surgeries or anything else. This is a man, okay? He's gone through male puberty. He's an elite swimmer, and he's had all the advantages of, male anatomy and so forth. So he's been busy smashing female pool records. In the meantime, friction has been building within the team, according to a Penn female swimmer who said she feared for her ability to find employment after graduating from college for sharing her honest opinion about a transgender teammate. So this article and interview was anonymous. Since then, there's been a second swimmer that's also come out and anonymously been talking about what's going on in that swim program. But they're not willing to give their names because they're afraid that it'll hurt them professionally moving forward. Thomas' latest round of swimming record destruction came at a 3-day meet in Akron, Ohio, where numerous pool, meet, and program records weren't just destroyed, but lowered to a point where they may never be broken. Friday, the Ivy League 500 freestyle record was broken. Saturday, Thomas set the nation's best time in the 200 freestyle, which also destroyed pool, meet, and pin program records. So it talks about one race here where he won the race by a full 38 seconds, which I don't know a lot about swimming, but what I've been told is that is like he had time to get out of the pool, go to lunch, and come back after taking a shower and sit poolside waiting for the second person to finish. I mean, it's not just that he won in such a way that it's like this never happens. Nobody ever wins by 38 seconds in a race like this. He smashed the record. And so he's swimming times that are faster in certain instances than a biological woman has ever swam. Yeah, okay? So he's beating Olympic records, okay? Pretty much everyone individually has spoken to our coaches, so this is the anonymous female swimmer, about not liking this. Our coach just really likes winning. He's like most coaches. I think secretly everyone just knows it's the wrong thing to do. Then she says, when the whole team is together, we have this is what she says. I mean, oh my gosh. You realize what that means, right? I mean, that's really, you should try to avoid that language. I remember as a little kid, I said that, and I had this adult get in my face and say, you shouldn't say that. That's what she said. Oh my, go Leah, that's great, you're amazing. So in other words, that's what his teammates are saying to him to his face. It's wonderful, it's just amazing, but she says the whole thing is fake. That in reality, these women are all ticked off. Then it says Thomas, as a male, was a second-team All-Ivy League during the 2018-2019 season. Then the next year was canceled because of COVID, and so now he's come back as a male swimmer. And then here at the back of this, it says, I thought this was a very sad statement. This is, again, the woman swimmer speaking anonymously. She says, quote, when I have kids, I kind of hope they're all boys. Because if I have any girls that want to play sports in college, good luck. Their opponents are going to be biological men saying that they're women. Right now, we have one, but what if we had 3 on the team? there'd be 3 less girls competing. This situation's been in the news. There's been a number of articles written. I heard this somewhere. I didn't read it. I heard it, that at a recent meet that this male individual came in and crushed the competition. And from what I heard, the stadium where this event was taking place, there was total silence when he finished. And 30 seconds later or so, when the first place woman comes in and touched the wall, the stadium erupted in applause. And so the people watching this travesty, seeing it for what it is, responded appropriately. Now, a follow-up to this, a group of parents, these are the parents of the women's swimmer team, okay? And so they wrote a letter to the university and I think to the NCAA. I think the letter was probably sent to both. And I'll just read a little bit here. They say, there's a quote, "At stake here is the integrity of women's sports, the precedent being set, one in which women do not have a protected and equitable space to compete, is a direct threat to female athletics in every sport. What are the boundaries? How is this in line with the NCAA's commitment to providing a fair environment for student athletes?" That letter was sent on December 5th, and as of a few days ago, unless something has changed, the NCAA has not responded to this letter. So they've just ignored this. It says the University of Pennsylvania did respond, and here's a quote from the university. "Please know that we fully support all our swimming student athletes and want to help our community navigate Leah's success in the pool this winter. Penn Athletics is committed to being a welcoming and inclusive environment for all our student athletes, coaches, and staff, and we hold true to that commitment today and in the future." So yes, you can judge that statement and judge it harshly because that's judging it rightly. That statement is saying we're throwing women under the bus for the sake of this one male swimmer. And as Marie and I have talked about this in recent weeks, one of the things that I've just been, to me it's such a conundrum, is that the LGBTQ plus community, even now in our culture, represents such a small number in terms of a percentage, and yet they have power that is so beyond their numbers. And of course, the power they have is political power. And I'm sure political power is rooted in a lot of money. But it's just amazing to really think about how many rights are being violated because of this very small group of people.
The scary thing, though, is that if you go, well, listening to my middle school daughter, the number is growing like
Yes.
in amazing ways because the confusion that's been created has really been absorbed wholeheartedly by the kids, and where there's no, I mean, my goodness, where you have parents who are themselves confused about these issues, there's no stopping it, and it's growing uneven fast.
Is it confusion or is it attention seeking? That's
Well,
I think
both.
it's kind of like
It's
the
both.
in thing.
It's both.
And
But
I heard we
I
used
mean,
to have
it is.
anorexics and then we had cutters and now we have trends.
It is both, but where you have adults who are confused about how to counsel, right?
Right.
Well, that's I mean that's a major issue.
Well, and you said an important word. Canada has just passed a law that you cannot counsel against transitioning, and that's just not very far from here. When is that gonna take hold in America? And make it illegal that you can't even tell a kid, this isn't the
Think
right way
about
to
this.
go, or anything, you can't counsel against that.
Yeah, there's several issues that have just been brought up here, and I agree with your daughters, and I'm assuming that their evidence is anecdotal, that they see it in their schools.
Yeah, I hear it. I mean, it's
Yeah,
like in their face, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's in a shocking way.
yeah. And I've seen this just with kids in Stanfield, and particularly young women. Pretty shocking how many young women they've got girlfriends. And it does seem like young women are more susceptible to this than young men, and I don't understand the psychology of why that would be. I listened the other day to Jordan Peterson. You guys know who Jordan Peterson is? He's Canadian. He's a psychologist, and not a Christian, although I think his wife is. But he's a conservative, and he's a very articulate, very smart individual. And he was talking about this specific issue, and he said a lot of things that I'm hesitant to say it now because I'm going to not get it quite straight. But he was talking about the percentage of population of men and women who, given their personalities, have a certain vulnerability. A certain type of male, for instance, who has some more feminine parts of his personality, and he's male, and yet if he's not affirmed in his masculinity, he is more susceptible. And he shared how in his own private counseling work, a young man who came to see him who was very confused in terms of his gender identity, and he said he's clearly biologically male, he's male. And yet part of what was happening is that there was a militant homosexual student who was pressuring him, you're gay, you're gay, you're gay. And so there is a certain amount of social influence that's wrapped up in this.
I think another big problem is like, who do you send your kids to counseling? I mean,
Well, you have to be really
you have to
careful.
be so careful. We have some friends in Colorado, and they're not Christians, and their granddaughter who was living with them, when we saw her, it's like, I mean, my first thought was, holy cow, she's trying to transition. And the grandmother came to me and said, what do you do? And I said, she said, it's just too hard to be a woman. I said, so you need to ask her those questions. Why does she feel like she's not a woman? So she did, and she goes, Grandma, it's just too hard. She's seen Mom go through two horrific marriages where I'm sure Mom was beat, and God only knows what happened to the children during this time. So I said, you've got to understand the backstory before you can ever help these kids find their way forward. If I was a young person and I saw my mom just treated horrifically, I wouldn't want to be a woman either. That'd be way too scary, especially
Yeah.
in the world where it's so anti-marriage, anti-anything that makes sense. And so and I said, and you've got to find her a counselor, not one who says, oh, then let's change your sex, that'll make everything better. Because we know that's never the answer. That never works out. I mean, these people end up committing suicide at a large percentage because of that. And she said, I never thought about that. I said, sometimes we're just too close to those situations to know that this is a hurting child in a terrible situation, and you guys are making it better, but, she's got a multitude of questions to ask somebody who will give her some godly advice on what she should do. So it is, I mean, and it's getting harder and harder to find those counselors that'll have that
Well, no,
conversation.
I think what's shocking is just the speed. So,
Yes.
like, I mean, these things like that will make our jaw drop, right? That the kids are just, whether it's online gaming or whatever, that just, we encourages all of these kinds of things. And, I mean, we're talking one generation, right? I mean,
Yes.
you got, I mean, we're talking 12-year-old girls and boys that are, what makes our jaw drop is absolutely normal to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Normal.
Yes.
Abnormal became normal in one generation,
Like this,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, it's shocking.
it is, yeah.
You can't roll that back.
No.
Yes, and so these comments and observations, particularly what Carol, you have said, really does fill you with a certain amount of, I don't know what other word to use, but a certain amount of almost dread, because you start to realize how unbelievably difficult it would actually be to begin to solve these problems. Because it's rooted so deeply, I think, in the demise, the destruction, the breakdown of marriage and the nuclear family. And so, you've got just a whole generation now of young people who've not had necessarily good fathers or good mothers. They've not seen marriage done right. They've been hurt in various ways. They've been abused by men. And how do you even begin to deal with the destruction of all of that? And it does honestly seem quite overwhelming, doesn't it? Yeah. The other issue that Clara brought up, I don't have that, it's not on my list here, but it should be on my list because it is very concerning. She mentioned that Canada has outlawed any teaching, along the lines of conversion therapy, what it used to be called. And there were times in which various versions of this probably should be banned. Pretty barbaric things happened. A homosexual, we're going to try to solve your problem, so our solution is electric shock therapy. Things like that have happened, right? We just need to acknowledge that, and that's not an answer, to be sure. But so now you've got a situation that's gone so far the other way that if you're a counselor in Canada and someone comes to you and says, I have gender dysphoria issues or I have gender identity issues, and they come to you saying, I want help. I don't want this. Please help me to try to process what I'm feeling. If you don't affirm the person in their identity, you're in big, big trouble. You could lose your license. And some of the things I've been listening to are suggesting that pastors and preachers are facing real challenges in Canada because if they get up and preach, well, I don't know, like maybe Romans chapter 1, beginning in verse 18 and following, that, they could actually, the word used was they could be arrested.
I used to think that lay people need to bone up and be ready to do some counseling. Like, I have no credentials, so as a friend, I can talk to you.
But even lay people could be, if it's all falls into the category of like hate speech, it's a scary situation. And we have a lot of biblical, the Bible speaks into these issues, doesn't it? So look at Acts chapter 4. Let me just read some passages to you. Because when you hear these kinds of things, this is, you do think of the book of Acts and the early church. So Acts chapter 4, verse 3. And they arrested them and put them in custody until the next day. So the context here is that Peter and John are preaching Christ. I think the context is, go back to chapter 3, they've healed a person, the lame beggar, who I think had never walked before, and they made his ankles strong, and he went, verse 8, leaping and walking and praising God. Do we have a song after this? Leaping and walking and praising God. I think it comes from that text. And that leads to a discussion about how this happened, and they say in chapter 3, verse 14, but you denied the holy and righteous one and asked for a murderer to be granted to you, and you killed the author of life, whom God raised from the dead. And because the religious leaders didn't repent at that moment, the only other response open to them was hostility and anger. And so they arrest Peter and John, and it says keep them in custody until the next day. And then if you go to verses, 23 to 31, I'll just read that text. When they were released, they went to their friends and reported what the chief priests and the elders had said to them. And when they heard it, they lifted their voices together to God and said, Sovereign Lord, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and everything in them, and through the mouth of our father David, your servant, said by the Holy Spirit, why did the Gentiles rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his anointed. And so they quote Scripture. Anybody recognize that Scripture quotation? Psalm 2, which is a great psalm about, people rejecting Christ. For truly in this city there were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your plan had predestined to take place. And now, Lord, look upon their threats and grant to your servants to continue to speak your word with all boldness. So there's a word for us, right? In view of opposition, speak the word with all boldness. While you stretch out your hand to heal, and signs and wonders are performed through the name of your holy servant Jesus. And when they prayed, the place where they were gathered together was shaken, and they were filled with the Holy Spirit and continued to speak the word of God with boldness. Now that leads to chapter 5, and I really don't have time to read all of this to you, but in chapter 5, verse 18, it says, they arrested the apostles and put them in the public prison. Now, I've always thought that, it's always stood out to me, because in chapter 4 it says, verse 3, they arrested them and put them in custody until the next day. So I interpret chapter 4, verse 3 as they arrested them and they put them in the Holiday Hilton and fed them breakfast because they had room service. Okay? But in chapter 5, they arrested them and put them in the public prison. Okay, so now the screws are being tightened. And yet the apostles don't crack, they don't break. And look at verse 41. Then they left the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer dishonor for the name. And every day in the temple and from house to house, they did not cease teaching and preaching that the Christ is Jesus. Isn't that significant? In the midst of persecution, they were rejoicing. And so I think there's so much ammunition for us here, or the Canadian church or the Canadian pastors who are in the sights right now in a way that we aren't yet and hopefully will not be, that they're called to preach the Bible. And that means they're called to preach whatever they find in the Bible and to not be ashamed of what's in the Scriptures. And we need to have the same kind of courage. And you could go, the book of Acts is just a great place to go for these kinds of situations. All right, 2 other items. And these get more to the issue of religious liberty in the United States. This is a Christian college, and I'm just going to read my underlines here. This is Al Mohler. This is from the briefing from November 18th, so it's several weeks ago. Let's say that you and some of your friends want to start a Christian college. Let's say that you hold to the radical idea that a Christian college ought to teach Christian truth. Let's say that you hold to the radical idea that the students and faculty of that college ought to live by Christian truth, ought to live by Christian morality, ought to hold to and live out a Christian understanding of gender, marriage, and sexuality. Now, has that ever been controversial? Not really. I mean, the Christian colleges have the right to operate according to Christian conviction. But it's becoming controversial now. The Biden administration has declared, this is a Christian college president who's making this comment. The Biden administration has declared that we must start letting men into our young women's dorm rooms, showers, and locker rooms, or else face the wrath of the federal government. The president then said, if we don't cease what it calls gender identity discrimination, the federal government will punish our 115-year-old institution via laws that were written to stamp out racism. We need to understand at a far more fundamental level, this is an absolute and insidious attack upon religious liberty. It is telling a Christian college it cannot operate on Christian terms. Now, I don't know how many Christian colleges are actually facing this, but this is the threat, that if you have a student on campus who identifies on the LGBTQ spectrum, that schools are going to be put in this situation where they either hold the line and the government becomes their enemy, or they don't hold the line and they violate their Christian conviction. He goes on to write, this is the president of this school, and he's reflecting here just on the last 50 years. He says, college campuses, he's thinking here in the United States, have certainly been super spreaders for the sexual revolution. And since then, most campuses implemented co-ed dorms. But until now, no one has forced private colleges to reject the wisdom of having separate dorms for men and women, half of whom are teenagers, nor has the federal government compelled colleges to deny the basic biological reality that there are two sexes. So this is another story that's in the news, and actually this Christian college is suing the federal government. They're trying to get ahead of this, and we should pray that they are successful. It's the College of the Ozarks. And then the last one that's caught my attention is the Department of Health and Human Services has revoked certain faith-based exemptions for child welfare agencies as part of a broader move to roll back Trump-era protections on religious liberty. And so this is Javier Becerra. Javier Becerra. We've mentioned him before. He leads HHS, which is Health and Human Services. And what they're doing here is there are religious waivers that faith-based adoption agencies have, and these religious waivers are being stripped away, and so it's putting adoption agencies in a situation where if they don't work with LGBTQ couples or individuals, that they're going to lose federal funding or federal contracts. Quote, our actions ensure that we are best prepared to protect every American's right to be free of discrimination, Secretary Becerra said in a press release Thursday. With the large number of discrimination claims before us, we owe it to all who come forward to act, whether to review, investigate, or take appropriate measures to protect their rights. At HHS, we treat any violation of civil rights or religious freedoms seriously. So, in the name of religious freedoms, they're telling evangelical and Catholic adoption agencies that if they don't work with LGBTQ individuals or couples, in violation of their religious theological convictions, that they're going to lose contracts and funding, and all of this is being done in the name of religious freedom. Now, what's really interesting about this one, anybody know what makes this particularly interesting? We talked about it here just 3, 4, 5 months ago. There was a case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. Catholic Services versus the city of Philadelphia. And the city of Philadelphia said, we're cutting your contract because you won't work with gay and lesbian individuals or couples. Went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided in favor of the Catholic Services. They won the case. So the Supreme Court made a ruling, and yet that ruling is just like, who cares, I guess, because now HHS has made this new policy, which is going right back to where the Supreme Court had made a decision. And so I also point this out to you because it reminds us of what we refer to as the administrative state. You know, the federal government has all these agencies, and all these agencies are filled with individuals who are career bureaucrats or appointed by various administrations. They are not answerable to the voters. They're not answerable to the people. And they're making these decisions. And so since when does the Department of Health and Human Services have authority to tell a Christian organization how to operate? And yet this is happening all the time in our culture. And it just seems to me, again, it's government overreach. And it's the reality that we've created this leviathan called the federal government. And it's unrestrained and has enormous power. It has the power to crush individuals and faith-based organizations. And increasingly, it's being used to do just that.
If I add another layer to that, the vast majority of the adoption services in the nation are actually faith-based.
Yes.
A big majority of the adoptions that are happening through state agencies are actually being done through faith-based organizations, which they're now saying they don't want to work with. But if they take those away, the adoption world goes crazy. There's no people to do it, or very few people.
Yeah. Another one just this morning, I mean, Build Back Better is apparently dead. You know what Build Back Better is? That's Biden's final major social change legislation. Just this morning, Joe Manchin came out and said, I'm not going to vote for it. He said, and they asked him point blank, does it mean that it's dead? He said, yes. So that's pretty big news. But in Build Back Better, there's money for child care, preschool, millions and millions, maybe billions of dollars. But it's in the legislation. If you're faith-based, you don't get a dime. And half of child care, like you think of the Lutheran program in Hermiston, right? Bethlehem Lutheran. You know, half of children who are going into those kinds of situations are going into faith-based churches who have a daycare program. And the money in Build Back Better was to help those churches with facility improvements, like maybe building a playground, that sort of thing. And it's in the legislation that this money cannot be used by any organizations that have what's described this way as a majority of their work is religious. And again, you just ask, well, where does that come from? Where does the Constitution ever say that religious organizations can be discriminated against and persecuted in that way? Does the Constitution talk about a radical separation of church and state? It doesn't. It says that we're against the establishment of a state church. Okay, that's a very different issue. But, so again, there's this animus against Christianity, and especially in the Biden administration, and it's really something else to behold. So we're out of time, but I think that kind of brings us up to date with what's happened. And so I need someone to close our time in prayer.